Ricardo, a 28-year-old with tired eyes and the worn cap of a well-known delivery company, was parked on a busy street in Los Angeles. The afternoon sun beat down on the asphalt, and the smell of street food mixed with car exhaust. He was waiting for his next order, his mind fixed on the day's quota to pay the rent for his small apartment in Hollywood. His phone screen lit up, and a new order appeared: priority delivery to Sky Tower, 1000, Wilshire Boulevard. A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't the order itself, but something in the image of the skyscraper that accompanied the notification. Suddenly, the city noise faded, and the colors lost their vibrancy. The phone screen flickered, not with a defect, but with a distortion that seemed to come from within. In a blink of an eye, Ricardo wasn't on the sidewalk anymore. He was inside, in the lobby of the Sky Tower, a luxurious place, but now strangely dark. The sound of cracking dominated everything, and the floor began to tremble. Large pieces of concrete fell from the ceiling, and the structure groaned. He saw people running, in a panic, and the image of a massive pillar breaking loose, coming towards him, filled his vision. A silent scream tore through his throat as the world around him crumbled, and the impact was a chilling void. Ricardo awoke abruptly, gasping, back on the sweaty sidewalk of Los Angeles. Sweat ran down his forehead, and his cap was askew. His phone still glowed with the order notification for the Sky Tower. His fingers trembled as he tried to decline. Motorcycle problems, he typed hurriedly, but the message failed. He tried to lose the order, turning the app off and on. Nothing. With each attempt, the urgency increased, and the app's insistence directed him to the fateful address. A dark premonition enveloped him, a sense of inevitability. He looked up at the sky, where the Sky Tower would stand, and a shiver went up his spine. What the hell had just happened? A cold sweat still ran down Ricardo's neck as he followed the GPS instructions. Every turn, every traffic light, seemed like a step closer to the abyss his premonition had drawn. He tried desperately to find excuses to abort the mission. He thought about faking a flat tire, running out of gas, but the relentless pressure of the daily quota, as inexorable as gravity, propelled him forward. The app, with its robotic, insistent voice, repeated the address: arriving at your destination, Sky Tower. When he finally stopped in front of the imposing glass and steel skyscraper, Ricardo's heart pounded like a war drum. It was identical to the one in his vision. He dismounted his motorcycle with shaky legs, the food bag heavy in his trembling hands. The lobby was as luxurious as in his premonition, the scent of marble and disinfectant lingering in the air. Delivery for apartment 34B, the receptionist said with a polite smile. In the elevator, alone, Ricardo felt the ground tremble. It wasn't an elevator tremor. It was something deeper, guttural. The lights flickered. A warning sounded on the building's intercom, but it was unintelligible, just distorted static. He pressed the ground floor button frantically, the food bag falling to the floor. The elevator door opened on the second floor, revealing indescribable chaos. Cracked hallways, dust suspended in the air, and distant screams. He ran. He ran without thinking, down the emergency stairs, bumping into others who were also fleeing the hell that was unfolding. Among the terrified crowd, he spotted some faces that stood out: a young redhead executive, Sarah, with a laptop in her hand, a burly security guard, Marcus, who was guiding an elderly lady, and a man in a maintenance uniform, David, who seemed to know the way. They escaped the building together, the sound of the collapse growing terrifyingly loud behind them, until, finally, the structure gave way with a deafening roar. Outside, the scene was one of pure horror. The Sky Tower, once a symbol of modernity, was now a pile of rubble and smoke. Sirens began to wail, and the media quickly arrived. In the following days, news reports showed aerial images of the disaster, stories about the hundreds of victims, and interviews with the few survivors. Ricardo, Sarah, Marcus, David, and the elderly lady, whose name was Eleanor, were interviewed extensively. They recounted the tremor, the scramble, the smoke. Ricardo listened to the details of the accident, the reports of structural failures, and a chill ran through him. Everything, absolutely everything, matched his premonition. He began to feel paranoid. What had happened? Why had he had that vision? He looked at the people around him with suspicion, wondering if death, somehow, had cheated him and was just waiting for the right moment to collect its debt. Every step, every shadow, seemed like an omen. Something was terribly wrong. That nightmare, the vision of his own death, didn't seem to have ended. Days turned into weeks, and the image of the Sky Tower's collapse remained vivid in Ricardo's mind. He tried to resume his routine, but paranoia was a constant shadow. His fellow delivery drivers noticed his distant gaze, his nervousness. One morning, as Ricardo tried to ignore the flashes of the premonition in his mind, the news broke. Marcus, the security guard he had seen in the Sky Tower lobby, had died. Not in a hospital, not from injuries sustained in the collapse. Marcus had passed away in a bizarre accident. He was fixing his fence at his suburban Long Beach home when a newly acquired robotic lawnmower malfunctioned. The power cord, loose and wet from a sudden rain, fell into a puddle, electrocuting him instantly. A subsequent lightning strike hit a nearby tree, which fell onto the house's roof, causing a fire. The tragedy was such an improbable sequence of events that it bordered on the surreal. Ricardo felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't just a fatality. It was strikingly similar to the sequence of misfortunes he had foreseen. He recalled the horror in his eyes when the pillar collapsed in his premonition, and the shock when the actual building crumbled. He shared his concerns with Sarah, the redhead executive, who was also in shock. "Did you see the news about Marcus?" she asked, her voice choked. It's unbelievable. How could something like that happen?" Ricardo, however, didn't find it unbelievable. He began to notice a pattern. Death, he thought, had been robbed of its victims at the Sky Tower, and now it was collecting. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. He shared his concerns with Sarah. "It's not an accident, Sarah," he whispered into the phone. "It's like death is hunting us. It wants what's owed to it." Sarah, however, remained skeptical. "Ricardo, please. We're all traumatized. Marcus was a horrible fatality, but it's not a conspiracy. It's not a horror movie." Sarah's skepticism frustrated him, but Ricardo was convinced. Death had come for Marcus. Who would be next? The feeling of being watched, the paranoia he had felt since the collapse, now turned into a chilling certainty. He could no longer ignore the macabre pattern unfolding before his eyes. Marcus's death confirmed Ricardo's worst fears. He knew it wasn't a coincidence. The need to understand the pattern, to unravel the sequence of events, became an obsession. He tried to contact David, the maintenance man, and Eleanor, the elderly lady, but with each attempt, a strange barrier arose. David had moved to Arizona without a trace, and Eleanor was unreachable in a nursing home. Ricardo spent sleepless nights, scribbling connections in a notebook, searching for something that united the survivors of the collapse. He remembered the few seconds they spent together as they ran down the emergency stairs. There was an order to their escape, a sequence. He, the first to run, then Sarah, who was closer to the exit. Marcus, who helped Eleanor. And David, who seemed to know every shortcut in the building. The tension grew with every news report he saw, every silence in the house. He knew who would be next. The premonition had shown him the lobby, the reception desk. The Sky Tower receptionist had been one of the first people he saw in his vision. Her name was Jessica. Ricardo tried to warn Sarah, insisting that Jessica was next. Sarah, still shaken by Marcus's death, but stubbornly rational, tried to calm him down. "Ricardo, you're seeing ghosts. Jessica's on leave. She's safe." But Ricardo wasn't convinced. He felt, deep in his being, that time was running out. He tracked down Jessica's address. He raced to her apartment in Santa Monica, banging on the door. No one answered. The building seemed silent, almost ominous. He tried calling, sent messages, but no response. Panic swelled in his chest. He tried, with all his might, to get there in time, to break the cycle, but a sense of helplessness washed over him. The next day, the news hit him like a punch to the gut. Jessica, the Sky Tower receptionist, had died. Her car, inexplicably, skidded on a dry patch of road on the Pacific Coast Highway, colliding with a garbage truck. The details were vague, but the bizarre and tragic nature of her death screamed to Ricardo, death had collected another debt. He tried to warn, he tried to save, but he failed. He began to understand that death could not be easily cheated. It was patient, relentless, and followed its own macabre script. Jessica's death solidified Ricardo's conviction. He and Sarah, the last two survivors who remained in contact, had to act. The investigation became a desperate race against time. They locked themselves in Ricardo's small apartment, delving into old newspapers, online archives, and databases. They searched for any pattern, any story similar to theirs, large accidents where death was seemingly averted, only to claim its victims in bizarre and inexplicable ways in the following months. They discovered some chilling stories. A group of passengers who miraculously escaped a train crash in Chicago, only to succumb to a series of strange fatalities in the following months. A team of firefighters who survived a massive warehouse fire in Seattle, but were then decimated by a series of absurd events. The similarities were terrifying, chain reactions, improbable coincidences, deaths that seemed choreographed. "It's like there's a list," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide, skepticism slowly disintegrating before the mountain of evidence. "An order that must be fulfilled." They began to try and break the cycle. If death followed a pattern, maybe they could disrupt it. They thought about skipping their turn, swapping places. Ricardo, remembering the order of their escape in the building, suggested that one of them expose themselves to a minor risk, to see if death would anticipate it. Sarah, hesitant, agreed. Sarah attempted a risky road trip on a winding road, but nothing happened. Ricardo volunteered for a short flight on a small plane, hoping to trick death, but the flight occurred without incident. For a brief moment, they felt a ray of hope. Had they succeeded? Had death been outsmarted? But the illusion of safety was short-lived. The news arrived via an Arizona news website. David, the maintenance man who had disappeared, was dead. He was hiking on a remote trail in the Grand Canyon when a group of tourists inadvertently dislodged a loose rock, which rolled down the slope and struck him. His body was found days later. Another bizarre death, another survivor of the collapse. The panic grew, dense and suffocating. Only Ricardo and Sarah remained. Death had reached David, even though he was far away. Escape was useless. The race against time seemed to be coming to an end. Despair enveloped them. David, who had hidden himself in the middle of the desert, had been found by death. The list was shrinking, and now only Ricardo and Sarah remained. Fear was palpable, but a somber determination also took hold of them. If death was pursuing them, they would fight to their last breath. They concocted a final, desperate and audacious plan. If death was tracking them through their connection to the collapse, perhaps they could break that connection. The idea was to create completely new identities, disappear without a trace, and maybe, just maybe, confuse whatever was pursuing them. It was a shot in the dark, but it was the only card they had left to play. They spent days meticulously planning the details, acquiring fake documents, reserving tickets for a distant, as isolated a location as possible. The tension was at its peak. Every knock on the door, every unknown phone call, sent shivers down their spines. Ricardo barely slept, his eyes fixed on the window, searching for signs, for anything that would indicate death was approaching. Sarah, meanwhile, was pale and nervous, but maintained a facade of strength. On the day of their escape, they met at a small, discreet airport, in an isolated corner of the San Gabriel Valley. With pounding hearts, they boarded the flight for a small island in the Pacific. During the journey, with every turbulence, every strange sound, panic threatened to consume them. But the plane landed. They reached their destination. They spent the first few weeks on the island on high alert, expecting the worst. But days turned into months. There was no news, no strange accidents, no bizarre events. The sun shone, the sea was blue, and life seemed to have returned to a strange normalcy. They began to breathe easier, to laugh again. The false sense of security, like a balm, began to heal the wounds of paranoia. It seemed that, finally, they had managed to break the cycle. Ricardo, the last survivor, felt he had won. For now. Months passed on the paradisiacal island. Ricardo had found a simple job, delivering supplies by boat to neighboring islands, ironically still working in deliveries. Sarah opened a small craft shop. They laughed, told stories, and almost never spoke about the Sky Tower. Death's shadow seemed to have dissipated, replaced by the sun and the sea breeze. One afternoon, as Ricardo maneuvered his small boat through a narrow channel between two islands, a subtle sequence of coincidences began. The boat's radio, which had been silent for weeks, suddenly crackled, tuning into a local news station that spoke about a structural incident in a distant city. A fishing boat, apparently aimless, began to drift dangerously close to his path, and Ricardo had to swerve sharply. A seagull, which he had never seen so close, landed on the mast and watched him with a single eye. He felt a shiver. A distant memory of the premonition in the Sky Tower lobby. The feeling that something was watching him returned, stronger than ever. The wristwatch he wore, a gift from Sarah, stopped. The silence was deafening, broken only by the boat's engine. He looked ahead. The channel narrowed even further, and the tide was rapidly receding, revealing submerged rocks. Ricardo accelerated, trying to pass before he got stuck. Suddenly, a crack. It didn't come from the boat, but from inside the water. The boat trembled, and he felt a familiar vibration, a tremor he knew from his premonition. He looked down and saw, through the clear water, a tiny fissure forming in the hull. Water began to gush in. He tried to contain it, but it was useless. The boat began to sink, slowly, but relentlessly. The small engine sputtered, failed, and fell silent. A muffled scream escaped his lips as the icy water rose up his legs, then to his waist. He tried to swim, but his clothes weighed him down, and a sudden current pulled him under. The air in his lungs ran out. Darkness enveloped him. And silence took over the environment. Death won. Fate, patient and cruel, finally completed its cycle.